In this video, we'll be taking a look at 4 college basketball games happening on January 27th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 8 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 4 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Michigan State versus Rutgers. Michigan State walks into Jersey Mike's arena with that very clear business trip vibe, the kind where the warm-ups feel almost more serious than the introductions. They have that steady, almost stubborn identity that coaches love, built around half-court defense that squeezes the air out of possessions and an offense that does not rush but still scores with real efficiency. It is one of those styles that tends to hold up in hostile gyms because it relies more on habits than hype, and habits travel pretty well. You can practically hear the student section trying to rattle them, but this kind of team usually leans into the noise rather than shrinks from it. Rutgers, on the other side, is fighting through a rough season where the offense feels like it is working uphill most nights, even in a building that usually gives them a real push. They are clearly more comfortable at home. That part still matters, but some recent lopsided losses have shown how fragile things can get when the shots stop falling and the defense has to stay on the floor for long stretches. Those stretches turn into scoring droughts, the perimeter gets a little leaky, and the fouls start piling up as they chase and reach instead of dictating. Honestly, that is exactly the kind of game script a composed road favorite loves, because patience turns into runs, and runs turn into a scoreboard that suddenly looks ugly for the home crowd. Michigan State's whole approach is built to stretch those flaws until they pop, working through multiple options on offense, trusting the extra pass, and then locking in on the other end when they sense the other team slipping. When a defense that sharp meets an offense that is already under pressure, it does not always explode right away, but once it cracks, the points can stack up in a hurry, and the gap on the spread is often decided in that short burst. The roster piece plays into that story too, with Michigan State's main rotation steady aside from the long-term loss of Caleb Glenn, while Rutgers is missing an interior presence like Bay Fall and has Dorian Jones sitting out, which quietly thins their options when things get tough. Put that mix together with a hefty road number that still assumes Rutgers can hang wire to wire against this level of defense, and you get a setup where the favorite has every chance to lean on its maturity and depth until the margin lines up with that expectation. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan State Spartans to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total is where things get a little more psychological because the number in the mid-130s looks small at first glance if you stop thinking Big Ten slugfest and start thinking about how this kind of game actually breathes. Michigan State games rarely feel fast. That is the funny part, but the scoreboard usually tells a livelier story, with efficient possessions on offense and a defense that sparks quick scoring bursts the moment they sniff weakness. Here is the thing, once they build even a modest lead, they are very comfortable turning a controlled game into something closer to a sprint for a few minutes, and those few minutes are often where totals get decided. Rutgers might not be an offensive powerhouse, but the way they react when they are behind often helps the number, not hurts it. They foul when they chase, they send opponents to the line, and they have already shown they can get dragged into higher scoring nights when the rhythm gets chaotic and the whistle gets active. Think about those games where one team is scrambling, the crowd is begging for a run, and shots start going up earlier in the clock. Sometimes good, sometimes not, but always fast. That kind of emotional environment in a place like Jersey Mike's makes things noisier and messier, and messy basketball often leads to more points than anyone planned. We have already seen Rutgers push games into the 80s when things go off script, and Michigan State is more than capable of nudging an opponent out of its comfort zone with pressure, pace, and spurts, and those little momentum waves that turn into long scoring sequences. So instead of picturing some 65-60 grinder, you can realistically see a version where the road team scores with control, the home team is forced to keep attacking, and the free throw line becomes a frequent stop late as both sides keep the scoreboard moving. When one team brings an elite defensive profile but still puts up strong offensive numbers, and the other gives up plenty of points while chasing respectability, that mid-range total starts to feel more like a speed bump than a ceiling, especially across a full 40 minutes with emotions running high. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Nebraska versus Michigan. Odds makers are hanging a pretty bold number here, with Michigan set as a clear double-digit favorite at home and the total sitting up in that 153 to 154 range as of January 27, 2026. Nebraska walks into this spot unbeaten, sitting at 20-0 overall and 9-0 in conference play, one of the last perfect records left, yet the spread treats them more like a cute subplot than a genuine heavyweight. Michigan, of course, has the shine that moves markets, sitting at 18-1 with a top 3 ranking and a statistical profile that looks almost unfair, including that defensive efficiency figure sitting right around the 90.1 mark that has been near the very top of the country. On the surface, it feels simple, big brand at home with blowout wins stacked like cordwood, but once you move past the logo and the hype, the gap between these two is not as wide as that number suggests. Look at how these two actually play over 40 minutes. Nebraska sits around the fringe of the national top 10 in the major analytics, with a net rating in the high 20s, a top 25 level offense, and a defense that grades in the top 15, which is not exactly the profile of a team that should be spotted a double-digit cushion. They do it with a 5-out offense that pulls bigs away from the rim, forces defenders to run to corners, and punishes slow closeouts with threes. But it is not just a bombing run, it is paced and patient, more like a chess player waiting for you to blunder than a gambler throwing dice. On the other end, that no-middle defensive philosophy builds a brick wall around the paint, shoves drives toward help, and turns what look like easy lanes into a lot of contested floaters and late clock pull-ups. That kind of scheme tends to mess with teams that are used to getting downhill whenever they want, and Michigan fits that mold, since they are most terrifying when they are in rhythm, playing fast, and stepping into clean looks early in the clock. Tempo is another quiet part of this story. Michigan is most comfortable when the game drifts into the low 70s in possessions, where talent and depth can stretch things out, while Nebraska is far more content living in the high 60s, where every empty trip matters and every mistake feels heavier. That slower gear helps an underdog because it shrinks the number of trips each side gets, and when you are catching this many points, fewer total possessions mean each defensive stand and each made shot has a little extra leverage against the spread. Nebraska allows roughly 65 points per game and wins by close to 16 on average, which tells you they are not just skating by, they are controlling games, even when they fall behind early like they did in that recent comeback at Minnesota. Teams that can take a punch and then still execute their stuff tend to keep games sticky, even when they step up in class. If you zoom out to how the market has treated both sides, the pattern gets even more interesting. Michigan has spent recent weeks paying a bit of a tax to its own success, winning games but failing to cover several in a row as the numbers have crept higher and higher on the back of blowouts and highlight packages. Nebraska, on the other hand, has lived in the doubter zone all season, walking into road gyms as the team everyone wants to test rather than the team anyone fears, and yet they keep landing inside the number by doing all the small things that do not show up on a casual graphic. Both rotations have known issues, Nebraska missing a long-term sharpshooting guard and managing a young forward on the injury report, Michigan dealing with a freshman wing who has been banged up and a freshman swing piece sitting out the season. But these are not surprise losses that suddenly change the shape of this matchup. They are baked into how these teams have been priced for weeks. So when you put all that together, an unbeaten group that is this sound on both ends, that slows games just enough to keep things tight, and that keeps getting undervalued by the spread, catching a double-digit cushion against a home favorite that the market may love a bit too much starts to feel a lot less like a trap and a lot more like a calculated stance. As our first pick for this matchup, the Nebraska Cornhuskers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. A total number in the mid-150s is basically the market saying it expects a track meet, a kind of college version of an all-star game where the scoreboard operator gets more cardio than the cheer squad. You hear that and you instantly think of Michigan hanging huge numbers because their reputation is built on offensive fireworks, roughly 92 points a night, a top 5 attack by the big metrics, and a season full of wins that end with someone joking that the controller must have been stuck on rookie mode. But tucked inside that story is a defense that is just as nasty as the offense is pretty, grading in the national top 3 and holding opponents to low percentages both at the rim and beyond the arc, which quietly caps how wild games can really get against them. Nebraska brings its own twist to the scoring conversation. On paper, they are not some grinded-out slug with a Stone Age offense. They score around 81 a game, but they pair that with a defense that gives up only about 65 and a tempo that leans toward the measured side of things. They are not allergic to running, but they would much rather walk the ball up, spread the floor, and test your patience with cuts, re-screens, and resets until they find the shot they want, which naturally bleeds seconds off the clock. Defensively, they take away the easy stuff first, trying to erase layups and corner threes, and they are more than happy if you settle for the sorts of mid-range pull-ups and off-balance looks that keep the highlight reels quiet and the total in check. When both teams are that committed to guarding, the rhythm of the game usually shifts from wild swings to more of a slow burn, with long stretches where a single made shot feels like a big momentum swing. Recent form gives another hint. Despite that huge season average, Michigan has seen a run where most of their games have landed under the posted total, not because they forgot how to score, but because odds makers keep sending the number higher to catch up to their reputation, and conference opponents have more film, more time, and more motivation to drag them into more controlled environments. Conference officiating also tends to tighten up a bit, which sounds boring, but fewer random free throws and a little more physical play on the perimeter usually mean fewer extra possessions and fewer cheap points. If you have watched enough late January basketball, you know how often a matchup between two ranked teams turns into something that feels more like a playoff game, with coaches walking the ball up, calling sets from the sideline, and players valuing each trip like it might decide the league title. The stage here fits that script nicely. A packed arena, a clash between two teams sitting near the top of the rankings, and clear implications for who controls the conference race all encourage a more cautious approach, especially as the game wears on and every mistake starts to feel bigger. It is very easy to picture the second half turning into a possession-by-possession grind, with both teams working deeper into the shot clock, hunting matchups, and staying locked in defensively rather than turning this into a wide-open, trading threes kind of showcase. So when you stack up Michigan's elite defense, Nebraska's willingness to slow the game and guard, the recent trend of totals coming in below inflated numbers for at least one of these sides, and the playoff-style environment that tends to squeeze scoring chances, that total sitting in the mid-150s starts to look a bit ambitious, almost like it was set more for the highlight clips than for how this might actually play out on the floor. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Virginia versus Notre Dame. Virginia heading into South Bend feels a bit like the older, more experienced sibling walking into a family pickup game. You can almost sense it before the ball is tipped. They have that steady, businesslike vibe, the kind that usually plays pretty well in a cold Atlantic Coast Conference road gym where the band is loud, the student section is chirping, and every empty possession feels heavier than it should. On one side, you have a Virginia group that treats structure like a strength, not a restriction. They are comfortable running their stuff, getting to their spots, and squeezing value out of almost every trip. It is not flashy, but it is efficient, and it travels. You see it in those stretches where they calmly stack stops, string together a handful of clean looks, and suddenly a two-point game has turned into a double-digit cushion. That kind of control is brutal for a home underdog trying to ride emotion because there are fewer chaotic swings to latch onto. On the other side, Notre Dame is still very much in that figuring it out phase. You can tell they want to compete, and they do scrap, especially at home. But there is a difference between fighting hard and having a clear, repeatable way to win against a disciplined opponent. Too often, their offense looks like it is working uphill, needing tougher shots or streaky stretches just to keep pace with teams that know exactly who they are. In a matchup like this, that matters more than any single number or highlight play. Then you fold in recent form and how each side has treated bettors. Virginia has been the friend you invite back to the table, covering spreads with steady margins and handling the road like a team that trusts its identity. Notre Dame, meanwhile, has felt more like a roller coaster where even the competitive games have not always turned into tickets that cash. When a locked-in favorite meets a rebuilding home side that still has trouble closing strong or sustaining runs, it usually comes down to which team is more likely to control tempo, keep composure, and win the key stretches by multiple possessions. Here, that picture points in a pretty clear direction. As our first pick for this matchup, the Virginia Cavaliers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now, shifting over to the total, this one has a very different personality. At first glance, the raw scoring numbers might nudge you toward expecting a lively scoreboard. You add up what each team averages, and it is easy to imagine a game that drifts comfortably into the mid-140s or higher. But totals are less about simple addition and more about who actually dictates the style on the floor. Virginia has a funny way of making games feel slower than they look on paper. Even when they put up a healthy point total, the flow tends to be measured, almost like a chess match instead of a street ball run. They are happy to use clock, probe for a good look, and then let their defense do the heavy lifting on the other end. That pattern leads to long stretches where very little scoring happens, even if the final box score seems respectable. For anyone watching with a ticket on the total, those quiet stretches suddenly matter a lot. Notre Dame, for its part, has played in some higher scoring contests, especially against teams that want to push pace and prioritize quick shots. But that is the key detail. Those bigger totals often come when the opponent is eager to run and turn the game into a rhythm shootout. Here, they are dealing with a matchup that prefers control to chaos, and control usually trims a few possessions off the game. Fewer possessions means every wasted trip, every long empty stretch, chips away at the chances of a big number on the board. So while the season averages might whisper points, the actual stylistic clash says something different. You have one team that naturally squeezes tempo and another that has already shown it can stall out at times when the defense tightens and the game slows. That combination often produces a total that finishes below what people expect when they only look at surface-level numbers. It feels more like a methodical, possession-by-possession grind than a track meet where both sides are flying up and down and trading threes all night. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Arkansas versus Oklahoma. Norman is getting its full Southeastern Conference welcome party tonight, and the visitors look like they packed confidence in their carry-on. Arkansas shows up at 15-5 overall and 5-2 in Southeastern Conference play, sitting near the top of the league and inside the national top 20, while Oklahoma comes in at 11-9 with just 1-6 in conference games and a lot of recent frustration hanging in the air. The funny thing is, even with that contrast, the number on the board is tiny, with Arkansas laying only about 2.5 on the road, which tells you odds makers still respect how loud and lively Lloyd Noble gets and how tough an 8-2 home mark can feel when you are the one walking into it. From a betting lens, though, the two teams have told very different stories. Arkansas has been the group you could actually trust with your ticket, cashing 13 of its first 20 against the spread and stacking momentum with that blowout of Vanderbilt followed by a gritty comeback against LSU sparked by its young point guard driving the bus late. Oklahoma, on the other hand, has paid out in only about 7 of its 20 spots so far, and the Sooners keep finding fresh and painful ways to let tight games slip in the final few minutes, which gets in your head if you have ever watched a bet die at the free throw line. They have been stuck in a real Southeastern Conference skid, running into Missouri, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and Texas A&M in a stretch that has felt less like a schedule and more like a stress test, and the common thread has been the same issue: closing. Here is the thing that really tilts the chessboard. Arkansas is comfortable turning games into controlled chaos, pressing the issue, forcing decisions, and trusting that its depth and tempo will create cracks. Oklahoma has not punished that style often enough because its defense has been leaking points in bunches, giving up somewhere in the mid-70s per night and sitting in the lower half of the country in points allowed. Arkansas, by contrast, brings one of the more efficient attacks in the sport, living just under 90 points per game and rating near the top nationally in scoring, so that short road favorite number starts to feel less like a trap and more like a sale tag when you compare how each team handles pressure possessions. College hoops is still college hoops, so home court, rivalry juice, and random bounces always matter, and there is no such thing as a sure thing. But if you make us push our chips behind one locker room to cover this number, we would rather side with the group that has been finishing games, covering spreads, and playing like it expects to win than the one that is trying to remember what a feel-good night even looks like. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arkansas Razorbacks to cover the spread as favorites is our full-game side pick. Odds makers have set this total number in the mid-160s, right around 166.5 at a lot of books, and on first glance it looks hefty, like the kind of total that makes you gulp before you click anything. Then you remember what these two have been all season. Arkansas plays with the pedal down and sits near 90 points per game, one of the top scoring marks in Division I, while Oklahoma lives comfortably in the low 80s. Put those profiles together and, on paper, their average offensive output alone lands well into the 170s, which is why that big total suddenly does not look so crazy. Neither defense screams shutdown unit either. Arkansas has been allowing points in the high 70s on average. Oklahoma is giving up roughly the mid-70s, and both sides have spent a lot of nights in wide-open, rhythm-heavy games rather than slow, grinded-out rock fights. Recent form kind of underlines that story with a bright marker. Oklahoma just played that wild overtime game at Missouri that flew into the 170s, had another shootout with Florida that turned into a track meet, and even its losses to Alabama and South Carolina turned into score-heavy affairs, where the Sooners were trading buckets instead of trying to squeeze the air out of the ball. Arkansas, meanwhile, has been living in the 80s and 90s lately, dropping 108 on South Carolina, 93 on Vanderbilt, and 85 on LSU in a stretch that feels more like an NBA scoring log than the old-school Southeastern Conference we grew up with. When both teams are that comfortable playing fast and firing early in the shot clock, it only takes one hot stretch from either side to push a high number into dangerous territory for underbackers. From a totals perspective, Arkansas games have leaned slightly toward the high side, with more overs than unders so far, while Oklahoma has hovered right around even, and that mix usually tells you odds makers are still chasing the right number. In a spot like this, with a national audience, a loud building, two offenses that trust themselves, and two defenses that have not exactly built their reputations on holding teams in the 60s, it feels far more natural to cheer for baskets than to spend 2 hours rooting for missed shots and long, ugly possessions. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.